It's time for another episode of the Apple Circle podcast, folks. We've got a lot to get into, including a lot of drama in the Apple world. We've got some leaks and rumors, but also lots of catfights happening on tech Twitter this week, which we'll get into regarding some new Apple products. Matt has some impressions on the Studio and Studio Display. I'm very curious to hear your thoughts, Matt. We have not talked about it yet. Save it for the podcast. But first, we want to get your guys' feedback, your thoughts. If you have thoughts on anything Apple just released, if you picked up a Studio or Studio Display for yourself, or even the iPhone SE 2 or iPad Air, all the new stuff, let us know your thoughts at our Apple Circle hotline. That number is 949-354-3508. You can tweet us. We're the Apple Circle on Twitter, or you could subscribe to the YouTube channel, which I will say the Apple Circle podcast channel has reached the milestone of 500 subscribers. So we're not the biggest and baddest out there, but hey, 500 is nothing to complain about.
For very rare promotion, we're happy. So thanks to everyone who is watching over there and subscribing and enjoying the content. It's great. It's growing.
People like, I always like the video version of podcasts. Usually I'm sitting and I kind of just like to refer to the people and see kind of what's going on. There's a different element with video. And sometimes we also throw some cool like little Easter eggs in for video. Matt always has a nice clean setup. I have literally it's a nursery / a desk. So that's what I'm going with. But, okay, so Matt, it's been a week. There's a lot to get into. But first, I have not used either the Studio or Studio Display. I've seen some coverage, but I have not even seen them with my own two eyes. You, though, have both. Tell me your initial impressions on sort of both of them. I'm sure one is a little bit more interesting than the other, but tell me your thoughts sort of almost a weekish later.
Yeah, so, I mean, going in, I ordered the base model of both. Now, for the Mac Studio, there was a technical reason why I did the base model, and then also just a philosophical reason, I guess. The philosophical reason is I don't need the power of the Ultra, even though it'd be nice to test and have the extra $2,000. Not necessarily worth it, only because I already have the M1 Max in the MacBook Pro, and I've never had an issue with it, with everything I've thrown at it. So it's like I don't need that power, and it's not like that power comes at no cost. It's $2,000 for that cost. So it's like I didn't really need that. But the more technical reason why that didn't happen, the more real reason, is because on event day, or whenever they dropped it to order, I went to go pre-order and ordered the base model. Then I was like, nah, I should probably get the Ultra. Went to go order the Ultra, and as it was in my cart, it slipped to like April. So I was like, man, and then I went back to the base model. It was still available, so I picked one of those up. But yeah, the Studio is there, and then also with the Studio Display, it was actually kind of the same story. I originally ordered the regular Studio Display with, base stand, no matte finish or anything like that, just the, base Studio Display, and I was like, I kind of want that upgraded stand because the height adjustment is kind of one of the key features of this that you wouldn't be able to get with like an iMac, say. And then I went to go order that, already slipped, so I couldn't do that. So basically, I'm stuck with the base model. And I don't know, my excitement, we've talked about this on the show a little bit, but as they announced it, I was really excited. And then as days went on, I was a little less excited. And now that I've got them, my opinions have switched on what I like more. You'd think that the Studio would be the really cool product because it's such a lot of power and such a small device with tons of ports. It's the Mac Mini Pro that all of us were kind of hoping for. And that's true. But I think because I already have the MacBook Pro, it just isn't exciting me that much because it's like nothing really different except for the fact that I have this really chunky, huge square aluminum cube that I have sitting on my desk, which that's very cool. I like that. But there's just nothing about it's just like a computer that does the same thing my computer already does. So I'm not like that excited about it. Now, we'll get to the controversies on both of these in a second, but I am actually much more excited about the Studio Display. Now, all the reviews you've probably seen on this are hitting everything on the head, or I guess that's the saying. Yeah, the nail on the head here. Everything everyone's saying about this display is true. Main thing being, it's a great design. The hardware is excellent. The screen panel does look very good. It's still a 5K panel. All that stuff is great. But the price point for what you are getting is maybe a little bit too high because there are other options out there that provide a very similar experience for much cheaper. I basically agree with that. And then I guess we can go into the controversy there, but yeah, that's my basic impressions. I love the display, but I also agree that it's a little too expensive. And the Studio is great. It's just that I already have the basic power here, so I'm not like in love with it or anything. It's just very cool. But Well, we'll talk about it more in a little bit, but that's kind of my basic opinions.
So I guess the studio, let's get that out of the way because it's a little bit more boring. We both have M1 Max MacBook Pros now. And the studio, like we had talked about before, really doesn't get you anything. I guess it's sort of convenient because you have a stationary little box here. It's got some ports on the front, some good I/O on the back. But if you already have a MacBook Pro and you pair it with like a CalDigit Thunderbolt dock, which is a couple $100, you're set. You basically can Frankenstein your own Mac Studio. There really isn't anything you're going to get. Though I will say now that this is an option. If I was to do it all over again, I'm sure, Matt, well, I don't know, Matt, if you were to do it all over again and you started from zero, would you go MacBook Pro or would you go Mac Studio? And I guess to that point, I forgot what the spec of this MacBook Pro was, but let's just say because the Mac Studio is different, would you use, let's say, that extra budget that you would have spent on a spec'd out MacBook Pro to upgrade any parts of the studio if you were going to do this all over again and if you were to buy a Mac Studio instead of a MacBook Pro?
Yeah, it's a good point because the MacBook Pros that we have are around $4,000, if not like $3,500. Like they're pretty close to the M1 Ultra price of the Mac Studio. What I would actually do, going back in time, both of these products are available at the time of purchase. I would actually probably get, now I'm thinking about this on the spot. Initially, my thought is to say I would get the same kind of base model M1, every single week we're going to have a segment where we try to say all these names at the same time and then it just never comes out right because they're just so confusing. The Mac Studio with the M1 Pro, M1 Max, there we go again, not the Ultra, I'd probably get that model still and use the kind of extra money I have to get either fully spec'd MacBook Air, probably not, or a base model M1 Pro MacBook Pro, because then you're getting the best of both worlds for a similar price to an M1 Ultra Mac Studio.
Oh, that's a good point, actually.
Because then you get the best of both worlds. And when I'm on the go, like, do I really need to be doing all of that power? Do I need to have all that? The M1 Pro is still excellent. And I definitely could get by with that. And you're getting the M1 or the mini LED display. You're getting the great keyboard. You're getting the portability, all the great battery life. And then when you're at home, you have that base station, which, in that scenario, you actually still do have more power because you have the Max instead of the Pro. That's my initial thinking. Yeah, but I also haven't really tried the Ultra, so I could be swayed. But honestly, like the specs and the, performance upgrades that everyone's shown with the M1 Ultra, it while very impressive and it does seem to be about twice as fast, it doesn't really seem like it unlocks more of what we could do, at least for our workflows. I don't know. Do you agree with that from like what you've seen?
Yeah, well, so a couple of things. First off, I have yet to see a compelling case for M1 Ultra. I think The Verge's review said it best. They said everyone who used sort of Apple Silicon was blown away by the power of these chips, and the M1 Max is amazing. The M1 Ultimate, the M1 Ultra, while it's nice, it's not. Yeah, wouldn't that be nice? It's nice, but not necessary. I think that, making that jump from Intel to Apple Silicon, especially the M1 Max, you really hit your stride there and you're going to notice some huge differences. But with the M1 Ultra, it's not so much. It's more nice to have, but not necessary. I've also seen sort of in the stuff I've seen that it's not always double the performance. Like You're maybe going to get things a little bit faster, but not that much, especially like in Final Cut. My question is, if I could actually test an Ultra, is how much faster could I really export a video? The same video that I have on my M1 Max with the M1 Ultra is it 15, 20, 30 seconds faster? Because at that point, there's really, what's the point of that $2,000? Because the difference between M1 Max and the high-end Intel chips was so big. That was like, we're talking 5-10 minutes, if not more sometimes with project exports. That's a huge deal compared to, seconds or maybe a minute. That's not so much. So I was thinking actually, if I was to go back, okay, let's say I get the base M1 Max Studio. I was thinking originally, I guess I could, maybe bump from 32 to 64 gigs of RAM and maybe do some adjustments there. But I like your plan a lot better, which is to buy the base one for, which I will say at the education store, I think is $17.99, which is a really good deal. And then use the difference there. I mean, I was looking, you can buy the 14-inch is probably a little too out of spec. That's another $2,000. So for $4,000, you could really have a really nice 14-inch MacBook Pro and a Mac Studio. But if I go back here, the base MacBook Pro, just the M1 MacBook Pro, that's $1,300. So for $2,000 plus for $3,300, you're still significantly less than the M1 Ultra.
All right,
and
hold on.
You've got
I gotta
two
stop
Macs.
you here. I gotta stop you
go
here.
ahead.
You're telling me you're not going to spend the extra $700 to not get that crappy MacBook Pro?
Oh, no, I would. Yes. Well, I'm just saying here, hold on a second. The base MacBook Pro,
the 14-inch, the base is $2,000.
$2,000.
So it's $700.
$600. $700. Whatever it is, yes. I would definitely do that.
I think that's worth it. The screen, the keyboard, the ports, I think it's worth it.
So I guess there's a good choice there. You could either have the M1 Ultra Mac Studio or the way better value, get the base Mac Studio and a base 14-inch MacBook Pro. Like you said, Matt, you sort of have a great laptop that's still plenty powerful with that M1 Pro, really nice keyboard, mini LED display, all that stuff, ProMotion too. And then you get home, you can dock with your M1 Max. That's the dream right there. I keep thinking that's what I want. I want a powerful desktop computer and then just a laptop with, give me a little bit of power, like in case I want to edit, but really just like a nice, versatile laptop that is not meant to be my editing machine or the main editing machine, but just something that sort of supports my video workflow lifestyle as I go.
Right.
That's
like
the
if
dream.
I need
so
to,
that's super
I
cool.
can do whatever I need on the computer, but I'm not planning to spend all day on this computer.
Exactly.
Yeah, but there is one thing that we're kind of leaving out of this whole equation, though, and that's that the Mac Studio still needs the entire, sorry, I hit the mic there, needs the entire everything else to go along with it, which
true.
obviously adds some cost.
Well, I guess, and this is, I guess, a good question. Do you think people who buy the MacBook Pro, well, I guess it depends on the user. Do you think those who buy the MacBook Pro really only use the laptop, or do you think, because I assume many people out there, not everybody, but many do have a keyboard, mouse, and a display of some kind to use with their MacBook Pro if they're really doing video editing, stuff like that, because most people, I feel like, have some sort of desk setup, right?
I like to think so, but also I've been so surprised by like what people do with their setups that I would not be surprised if it's closer to like 50-50. Some people do, some people don't. Yeah, I don't know. I would like to think that they do just because it's such a better experience, but also, I mean, the computers are good, and I see a lot of people buying 16-inch computers for a reason. So
that's true.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if people just do it all on the laptop.
So before we get into the display, which I really want to hear your thoughts on a little bit more, let's talk about a little bit of controversy with Mac Studio. So what has sort of erupted from Twitter and YouTube over the past few days is, to my understanding, people upset that there is an additional slot in there for an SSD that Apple has locked down that you cannot use. And also some people complaining that it's hard to get into the Mac Studio. You really got to break out your iFixit kit to get in there. Now, to me, I guess I just never thought about this as an issue because Apple never claimed this was modular. They did, I guess, say it's modular, but they meant that more in the sense that you could add peripherals and stuff like that. The Mac Pro is the modular, open it up easily, upgrade the cards, the RAM, stuff like that. The Mac Studio is not modular, so I don't understand what all the uproar is about, because Apple never promised you could put your own SSD in there and get away with it, right?
Yeah, I don't understand the controversy here. I guess the correct answer, or like the Apple correct answer for why that slot is there, is because that's what they use when you upgrade the storage from Apple, right? So that's like where the rest of the storage goes. It's not meant to add your own, but I guess, yeah, the issue is that if you even figure out a way to add your own storage, that the software blocks it from working, which, I mean, that's kind of annoying. I get the annoyance there. Like, the slot is there, so if you can make it work, why not make it work? And I wouldn't be surprised if there... Well, I guess that's firmware level stuff, so there's probably no way around it. But I could see that changing it. Well, no, probably not. It's not going to change. But yeah, I agree. There's no promises that this would happen. The only thing that would make you even think that is that they said modular on stage. But they clearly did not mean modular in the sense of taking it apart and updating everything inside, especially when it's all like... unified memory. It's got the chip. It's got it's designed in a certain way that they clearly didn't want you to get into this thing. Unlike something like the Mac Mini, where that actually was made to kind of update in a way. Most people obviously weren't going to do that. It was still very much a process, but you or I could easily have done it if we wanted to. Actually, you did on the Apple Circle. One of our first videos was updating the memory in the Mac Mini when that first came out. Not the M1, the Intel. You can't do it anymore in the M1, but that is a different route. Or the iMac 27-inch in the back, there was a slot there so you can insert more RAM. That's not the case here. I don't see why anyone would be surprised that Apple's not letting you upgrade the storage. It's just, I think it's a fake controversy. It's just, yeah.
People love to find things with Apple. And I get Apple has a whole sort of reputation for not being super right to repair friendly and stuff like that. But I feel like this is, I don't know if I really can get behind the uproar here because, like you said, it's there for a reason for the, higher end models that have whatever the threshold is, whatever the additional storage threshold is that needs another drive. That's why it's there. Would it be nice if you could use your own? Yeah, but Apple's not even giving you an easy way to get into this thing. So I don't know why you'd be upset. So that's that. Moving on to Studio Display, this has also been a point of contention for a couple of issues that have popped up. One is the webcam, the sort of high-end sort of Apple center stage camera. There apparently, with many models, is an issue where, what did Apple say? The signal processing isn't behaving as intended. They're going to push a software update, so that'll probably get ironed out, but as of now, it doesn't look all that great. But really, what seems to be the issue here is the price, $1,600 for this, and many argue that you're better off getting an LG Ultrafine 5K for $300 less and call it a day. And I get that, but I don't understand the controversy here either because, okay, the Apple monitor is $300 more, and yes, I understand on a spec sheet they're very similarly spec'd, but it's Apple. They always charge more for stuff, and I'd argue for the $300, you're getting a much nicer looking monitor and a much better built monitor, and I don't understand where the controversy is with that again either because Apple never charge things, they never charge prices that are the exact same as competitors. They always charge a little bit of a premium, so I also don't understand the uproar there either.
Yeah, no, I don't get it. And as someone who I have a Ultrafine 4K, so not the 5K, but the design of it is exactly the same. And I've used the 5K Ultrafine many times in the past. And now that I have the Studio Display, yes, does the panel look very similar? If not exactly the same to your eye, yes, it does, because it pretty much is. There's really no difference there. But I mean, $300 for this hardware, not the display, but the rest of the hardware, I think is well worth it. Where the issue comes is just like practically, on a brand new basis, I think the $300 is worth it for the Studio Display. But the Ultrafine has been out for so long that you could easily find a used option that is in perfect condition for a much cheaper price. And also, I guess, kind of going on with the Ultrafine being so old, is that since this technology is so old, I mean, they announced the 5K display. How long ago was that? 2014, I believe?
It's been a while, yeah.
It's been a long time. And this is basically the same panel, but they're still charging that much for it. Then, you kind of get, it's kind of annoying, right? That you're paying that much. And I think there's also a little bit here of the rumor mill kind of breaking what we are expecting and setting expectations that we're now let down from rumors rather than reality. We were kind of hoping that this would be a mini LED panel with maybe not 120 hertz, but mini LED at the very least. It's going to be very nice, very high quality, and it's the same old panel that we've had for a long time. So I think that is kind of lending itself to that because $1,600 for a mini LED panel, that sounds awesome, but that obviously didn't happen.
So a couple of things. One anecdotal note that I've heard is that according to Mark Gurman, Apple had these displays, or they at least started working on these displays like 2 years ago. So that's the reason why it's sort of got the guts of the iPhone 11. So maybe that's a reason why the specs of this are not as impressive as they are today. And then also, mini LED makes a lot of sense, but whether it's due to supply constraints or part issues, whatever it is, Ming-Chi Kuo, at least an Apple analyst, he said that Apple is not going to release any more mini LED products this year because of cost issues and because it would just drive the price up too much. Maybe that was a consideration somewhere in the development of Studio Display, was that we could put a mini LED panel in here, but it's just going to be way too expensive. We already have these bulk orders for the laptops. We just can't do it. I'm not sure what it is. I mean, obviously, yes, a mini LED display in here would definitely make it way better. ProMotion, I could give or take that. Yeah, they make it better, but it's not necessary. But it is what it is. And I see a lot of people are just very upset. And also, I see a lot of people complaining that this is a Studio Display. What kind of professional would buy this? Well, am I wrong here, or is this really targeted more of a consumer thing than a professional thing. I think Apple is targeting the Pro Display XDR for the pros. I don't think Apple ever specified that this was a pro monitor. Am I right here? Or is that just implied?
I mean, I think it's implied by the studio because, you know, they implied that this is for artists. This is for people who make their living with their computers. So no, I think they target it towards professionals, but it's not. I mean, well, I'm confused. Like, why wouldn't this work for professionals? Like, it's a 5K display with 6,
I guess people
P3 color.
just argue that the panel is on mini LED. It doesn't have the nicer specs. It's got the older specs. And I've just seen a couple of people.
Yeah, but I mean, there's like 3 monitors that are semi-affordable that have mini LED. Like, it's not that. Like, I don't get that argument. I think it's still perfectly fine for professionals, and plenty of professionals will buy it. You know, something that we've been talking about back and forth as we've been discussing this monitor is like, you know, we still kind of lust after the XDR, and that's still the monitor that we want. But for the price of an XDR, you can get 2 of these displays. Yeah. So, you know, the value is still better than everything else Apple offers. I think it's more just the fact that the ultrafine exists. If the ultrafine didn't exist, I think there would be no controversy. It's ultrafine having the exact same panel inside, pretty much, that makes this this controversy even make any sense, because this, you know, display is the perfect Apple display. Like, when you would think of what Apple would do, this is exactly what they would do. Yeah, it doesn't have the highest end specs, but the price isn't also like $4,000 like the XDR, but it has a great enclosure. It has great speakers. The webcam exists and hopefully will look better next time. You know, it's an Apple monitor. What do you expect? I don't know. Yeah.
Well, that's the thing too, is I feel like, you know, there's 2 camps. Those who understand good monitors and are probably paying pretty good money to get an ultrafine or, you know, a higher end monitor. And then those who really don't care and just will buy whatever, you know, on Amazon, a couple $100, you're good to go. And there's like this really big rift because it's a lot of people who buy the $400 or $500 monitors complaining about the price of this, but I think for what you're getting, and again, it's Apple. Apple always does this. I don't think that the $600 or $1,600 price point is absolutely outrageous. It seems okay. You're getting a very nice monitor for the price. And the other tough part here, and something I want to ask you is, the computers people upgrade fairly often. I feel like people don't upgrade their monitors all that often. And I think that this is a much more of a no-brainer if you're starting with no monitor. Maybe you're building out your setup. Then the studio display makes a lot of sense. But for you and for a lot of people who have monitors already and good monitors, is there enough here to get you to keep this thing? Or are you going to return it and wait to see what comes next with maybe a Studio Display Pro? Where do you think that decision is made? Because I know a lot of people already have monitors. It's like me. It's like, well, I have a nice monitor here. I'd love an Apple Studio Display, but is it worth $1,600? Like, is it $1,600 better than the monitor I've got now? I just don't think so. Now, that's where and I think probably a lot of people have a tough time trying to justify that upgrade.
Yeah, no, that's exactly the place I'm in. So I've talked about it many times on the show, but I have a BenQ PD2720U, 27-inch Thunderbolt 3 display, great color, great accuracy, everything. It's only 4K, not 5K. But, you know, it's a great monitor. I've been using it for years at this point. But I've been, you know, looking for something new. But is the studio display that much better than this monitor I already have? And it's like, not really. And I agree. If I didn't have a monitor, I'd be buying the studio display. No real question about it for me. But since I already have a display with very similar specs, and at least it's not going to change my workflow in any meaningful way, then I'm still wanting to get something like the XDR at some point. Yeah, maybe I'm going to have to get a used one. Maybe I'm going to have to wait until the 2nd generation or something like that. But I want to make that happen rather than just settle for the studio display, because it's just not that different than what I already have. That's kind of what I'm thinking. It's just, let me put it this way. I really want the studio display, but I can't justify it for what I have and what exists already in my life. And I think that's funny how a lot of people are feeling.
It's funny too. I've seen some wild justifications for why people need the studio display. Like, oh, it helps me create better and it's simpler and cleaner and funny things. But it's like, okay, so if you were to swap out your current monitor for the studio display, would it look nicer? Yes. Would it add any extra functionality to the way you work? Probably not.
Nope.
Whereas the Pro Display XDR, you're getting 6K resolution, you're getting those mini LED backlight zones, you're getting objectively a better monitor that does help you do things you cannot do with current monitors right now. And whether it's more space for you to work or it's, to have the higher quality preview or whatever the case may be, you're getting more with the the Pro Display. Is it more expensive? Of course it is, but it's in a class of its own where the Studio Display is sort of fighting at the upper echelon of sort of regular monitors, and I think that's where a lot of the issue is right now. I'd love the Studio Display, but for $1,600 or even more, if you wanted to get the nano texture and the stand, I'd rather get a new Mac or something else. I mean, I don't know how is that going to change any of the way that I work. That's where I'm at.
Right, and especially for like you, $1,600 or another $400 and get a base model Mac Studio. Mm-hmm. For you, that probably makes more sense, right?
Exactly. I'm eyeing that Mac Studio. I'm trying to figure out what I want to do. I think at this point, I still want to see what happens with either the Air or see what happens with the processor. Because I still think I've got the spec'd out MacBook Pro now. I really want a laptop. It's just a matter of, do I forego this laptop and get a more permanent desktop solution, or do I keep this docked and just get something else? That's where I'm at now. But I think the Mac Studio and the Studio Display, two great options, and I think it's nice that Apple has re-entered the studio space, but the display field. There are rumors that they are going to make a couple of other upgrades, that they'd maybe either replace the Pro Display XDR or give an additional model of that, which would be 7K, with more mini LED backlight zones and stuff like that. And also rumors that Apple could make a mini LED version of the Studio Display. Now, what I would love to see is, let's bring back the classic Apple move of like a cool 30-inch Studio Display. Even if, that would get me thinking a little bit more if they made a, mini LED 30-inch Studio Display. It didn't have ProMotion. It didn't have all the fancy schmancy stuff, but maybe it was like $2,000. That's a different story. And I think mini LED here, that probably would have really changed the game more than the regular LCD panel that's on there. And I think that's another reason why it sounds nice, but it really isn't going to do you any favors.
Yep. No, I completely agree. And I think that's where the rumors were really kind of taking a hit at what this Studio Display actually is, because we were kind of expecting that we were going to see something else, and we just didn't get it. But I think the controversy around this display is overblown. And I agree, it's a lot of people that were never going to buy this monitor to begin with who are complaining about it. So, yeah, I mean, it's a good display. If you're coming at it fresh with no options, I think this is probably the way to go for a lot of people. But, if you already have a monitor, then you wait and see what else Apple does until they have a compelling option. It's pretty simple, kind of the same argument that is always made for pretty much every product.
I feel like you yourself know how you work. You know your production workflow. If you're in video, if you're in photo, if you need this or not. I feel like the average home user probably isn't going to pick this up. Most people. I feel like it's more people sort of in that field.
Exactly. And that's basically the reason I haven't bought the XDR yet, because technically, yes, it will help me in certain areas, but will it help me in a $5,000 way? That's where it's like, it's tough.
That's the conundrum.
Exactly. That's the conundrum. Yes, technically it will help me in certain areas, but I don't know if it's worth the money just yet. So that's why I'm waiting for a used option to pop up, or for the second gen to buy the first gen, or, something to justify the purchase rather than, I really like it and I want it, which that's a perfectly fine justification. But when it's just a I want it purchase, you have to wait until it's the right time. You can't just splurge on that kind of stuff.
It's funny how we can do that with Apple Watches and AirPods and iPhones. And I guess, to a certain extent, those are a lot more attainable at their price points. I mean, you're talking about an Apple Watch that's maybe $300, not a $5,000, $6,000 display. I guess speaking of iPhone, so more bad news on iPhone 14. So we had talked last week about leaked schematics that came out that showed the iPhone 14 and the iPhone 14 Pro, and showed not a whole lot of design changes happening there. This was from 91 Mobiles and My Smart Price, and I did a little digging, and both of these have a mixed track record. Sometimes they were accurate, sometimes they weren't, so take it with a grain of salt. But again, this week, some more CAD files have come out from Max Weinbach, who again has had some misses in the past, but has still been fairly accurate on a couple of occasions. He also is confirming the same thing, that I don't think, according to what we know now, that iPhone 4 style design is actually going to happen on the iPhone 14. We are going to get the removal of the notch on the Pro model, so we're going to get that sort of double hole punch thing, but no round volume buttons, no flush camera system, no speaker mesh on the bottom. Sort of disappointing, but that's one rumor that doesn't look like it's going to happen anymore. So here we are. No design change.
So, I mean, it's not that surprising if you look at the track record. Well, I guess we have like 3 generation track record of this. So from the iPhone 7, well, actually, now I'm thinking about it. The iPhone 6 design stayed for a long time. So we got the 6, 6S, 7, 8. And now we have the SEs, which are still around, but I'm not counting those. So that's 4 generations of the same design. Then we got the 10, 10S, and 11, which is the same design. And now we have the 12, 13. Makes sense that the 14 would have the same design. So it's not all surprising that this is the case. It's just, you know, we kind of mentioned this last week, but the rumors are just killing us. I mean, these rumors are too good to be true. I don't know what's happening with rumors. Like, in a way, I'm actually happy. I'm happy that the rumors are wrong because it makes so much more excitement when the actual day comes. You don't quite know exactly what you're going to get. But on the other hand, like, it's just like, what are you reporting this for if it's not right? Like, what happened here? Something went wrong.
Well, it's interesting, too, because I saw a lot of people call out John Prosser. He's like, oh, he made this up because he wants the attention. I don't believe that. I think that
Oh, no, I don't think so.
John Prosser is doing his due diligence, and I don't think he was doing anything with any malice. I think he, shared this information that he knew to us because he believed it to be the case. And for all we know, this either still is the case or it was one of those things that it just changed, that this was going to be the design, and maybe it was like the Apple Watch Series 7 where there was just an issue with production, or they started to do some limited production and they found an issue. Whatever the case may be, I don't think that this leak was wrong from the get-go at all. I think there was definitely some truth there, but for one reason or another, as things seem to happen all the time, things change, and it looks more and more likely now that that's not going to happen, and that we are going to get a design very similar to the 13 next year on the 14. That really the only cosmetic change on the outside is going to be the double hole punch, which we're now learning is going to be bigger than we thought. So that's what we know right now. Basically, if you're holding out hope for a huge design change, probably not going to happen with the 14, at least as of what we know right now. So
yeah, and I still think my guess is that the product that he saw was real, but it's more likely like the iPhone 15. Like, I would not be surprised if the 15 actually does have this design. Still not revolutionary design. It's not going to be completely different because, Apple doesn't, completely change the design very often. It's just kind of, minor tweaks. So I could see them doing that for the 15 or a phone coming up, and they work on these phones so far ahead that phone could almost be finished at this point, right? So like, they still need to test manufacturing and everything like that, but the actual prototypes are probably pretty solid at this point, or at least some version of that exists. So I wouldn't be surprised if that's what happened. But yeah, I mean, I'm looking at some of the other things that happened. Forget the iPhone 14. iPhone 14 is old news. It's boring. We're back to who cares about the 14. Now we're looking towards the 15 though, because as the 14 seems kind of lame, everyone's like, all right, what are we going to see with the 15? Now we're going to get some good stuff.
It's always next year. It's always next year. The next model is going to be better.
Exactly. So guess what? Under-screen Face ID and possibly, Face ID basically. That's the same rumor that we were seeing with the 14 a few, months ago, like 6 months ago, which now is not happening because we're getting the double hole punch. Now we're going to get that in the 15 apparently. What do you think? Do you think that's actually going to happen? Plus, I guess, the idea there is there will also be no notch because it's under the display. So what do you think? I
don't think so, because I think Ming-Chi Kuo, for one, he changed his stance because he said that we were going to get a notchless phone this year, then it was going to be next year, and I think he changed that prediction later. And then also Ross Young, the display guru, the display analyst who works on more things than Apple, he also said that, and I think this makes sense, this year it's double hole punch on just the Pros, next year it's double hole punch on all of them, and there wouldn't be a notchless iPhone until 2026 at the earliest. So I think these are a little ambitious. I'd love them to be true, and it never fails every year. And I think that, again, there is a degree of a degree of truth here that there is probably a model of the 14 and the 15 with no notch that they've got under the display, and for one reason or another, it just doesn't enter mass production. And I mean, it's tough too because Apple can test this extensively with 5, 10, 15, 20, 100 employees, but there's a difference between 100 people testing something and it works 99% of the time, and then 100 million people or 10 million or whatever it is. I feel like Apple doesn't like to risk new technology. They want to make sure they get it right. So I feel like there's definitely something here that makes me believe that we will not see that for the foreseeable future, at least for another couple of years. So I am not going to hold my breath. At least what we know right now about the 14, with things changing, I am even less optimistic about that happening with the 15. So we'll see.
Whatever they say right now, who knows what it actually means? Because we got at least a year before any of this happens. So, well, not the 14, but the 15. So, I mean, yeah, I'm kind of over the iPhone at this point. Let's see what we get. It'll be exciting when it's here, but until then, who knows? The rumors are always going to be wrong. Now I'm just waiting to see what the next rumor is that's going to be completely wrong is going to be. So the iPhone 14, it's kind of, I mean, who knows? For all we know, John Prosser is completely right, and Apple is leaking all these things out as anti-propaganda or propaganda to make us all feel like the 14 is going to look lame and boring, and then when they really show it off, it actually looks like what Prosser said it was going to. Who knows? They could be doing some switcheroos on us. But something's wrong here, and it seems like every event we have from going forward is going to have one of those options, which I'm kind of happy about. I guess some other news that we got this week was interesting. I did not see this one coming, but apparently, so we're expecting the MacBook Air to come out at some point this year, which is going to have a complete redesign. I mean, it was supposed to have the M2 chip, but there's some debate on whether it'll have the M1 or the M2 just because of supply, and also maybe the M2 is just not ready. But yeah, this new thinner, colorful, white bezeled, white keyboard MacBook Air is supposed to be coming. But there's rumors now that in 2023 we might see a 15-inch model of that MacBook Air. Not a rumor I saw coming, and I don't know how I feel about it, but what do you think? Does this make sense to you?
This is an interesting one. I think that Mark Gurman had said before that Apple was testing this and they didn't do it, and I forgot if he explained why or not, but I think the obvious issue here is that putting a 15-inch MacBook Air in there sort of confuses the line even more. So you've got the Air, you've got the Pro. It's tough because I feel like for a lot of people, and maybe this is going to be the case because of the 14 Max, they want a large screen phone, or in this case, a large screen computer, but they don't need the Pro stuff. They don't need mini LED. They don't need the higher end processor. They don't need ProMotion, all those things. So if Apple's going to make a 14 Max to cater to that audience, then a 15-inch MacBook Air does make sense, because if you do want a large screen Apple laptop right now, you've got to go with a 16-inch MacBook Pro, which is, if I can do this here, starts at $2,500, which is expensive. So if Apple could do a 15-inch MacBook Air with an M2 and, it doesn't have all the bells and whistles, but it's still a great computer for $1,500, a lot more compelling than the 16-inch MacBook Pro. And a lot of people who want a large screen, they don't need an M1 Pro, they don't need the mini LED, they probably don't even care about that stuff. So I think that there definitely is room there. But on the other hand, we again have this issue of Apple almost cannibalizing their own sales, and it's a little confusing on why would you go with a MacBook Pro if you'd get a MacBook Air. We've seen more and more Apple cater to more and more segments of their audience, that they've got the iPad, iPad Air, iPad Pro. They've now making the Mac Studio. Apple is listening to their customers and offering different options for different price points and different users. So does a 15-inch MacBook Air make sense? Yes. Will we see it? I'm not so sure about that. What about you?
Yeah, no, I agree. It makes sense. Even though I actually am a very big fan of smaller screens, I like smaller. I went for the 14-inch MacBook Pro. I had the iPhone 12 mini when that was out. I have now the 13 Pro, not the Pro Max, because the screen on the Max is just too big for me. Or not the screen, but the overall size is just too big for me. I like the smaller things. But if there's anything I've noticed from quote-unquote real people, is that they love as big of a screen as they can get. So if there was a way to have a 13-inch MacBook Pro or MacBook Air in your backpack that then like unfolded into like a 32-inch display, people would be buying those. They love as big of a screen as they can get, even though personally I don't get it. I like having it nice and compact. So yes, I see a 15-inch MacBook Air selling really well, especially if it's at that like, you know, $1,800 starting price or something like that. I think that would be a really killer product that a lot of people would buy, especially with this design language that we're expecting to see. I mean, this MacBook Air is supposed to be really thin, you know, really sleek, sharp edges, you know, in a good way. And I would be excited to see what a really thin and lightweight 15-inch laptop looks like, because we don't really get those all that often. I think, at least from Apple, we haven't really gotten that. And then, you know, from other manufacturers, I'm thinking like, you know, the Surface. Well, no, that's not they don't have the laptop in 15-inch, I think, or maybe they do now, but you know, they had the Surface Pro, I believe, comes in 15, and that's pretty sleek, and that's just really nice. You know, I'm getting my computers confused. The Surface Book, I believe, comes in 15-inch, which you can then like detach as a tablet. I don't even know if they make that anymore, but point being, seeing a really thin, sleek 15-inch computer with the power of Apple Silicon inside and excellent battery life. I mean, this computer has the recipe for being like the best battery life Mac ever. 15 inches with a, you know, not too powerful, but still very efficient chip inside and lots of room for battery. That seems like a winning combo, and I think they would sell a ton of them.
I mean, a 15-inch M2 for, let's say, I'm looking right now, MacBook Air starts at $999. The higher end version is $1,249. I mean, for $1,499, a 15-inch base model makes a lot of sense, and honestly, I think you get a lot of people to spend the extra $500 to get a bigger screen. So I guess it does make sense, and like you said, people love their big screens, and Apple has sold a lot of people on a more expensive phone with the Pro Max, not because they needed the Pro features, but because they wanted the bigger screen. And I guess there's this... Oh, go ahead.
And I was going to say, and kind of going along with that iPhone is, you know, the rumor of the iPhone 14, they're getting rid of the mini. They're bringing the Max to the regular phone, just kind of showing how much people really want that bigger screen. They don't care about the small screens.
And I'm guessing that Apple probably convinced a good number of people to jump to the 16-inch MacBook Pro, not because they needed it, but because they wanted the larger screen. But their research probably tells them they could make more money by offering a larger screen, cheaper version of the MacBook Air. And I think that if we do see the 14 Max, that makes a lot of clearance and a lot of confirmation that a 15-inch MacBook Air might just be in the pipeline. And we had heard before Apple was testing it. I'm not sure how far they got in development of it, but it seems like this could be something they could easily churn out within the next year or so, which, according to rumors, we should see this in 2023.
Yep, 2023, and that makes sense. Although, you know, I think all of these rumors could easily turn into like 2024, 2025, just because of supply chain issues. We're already having things pushed that we're expecting this year. I mean, apparently that MacBook Air was not the 15-inch, but the regular one was supposed to be announced in March. So that, you know, things are all over the place of when we might actually see something like this. But I don't see it. I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility. And it's not like the line would be that confusing, because you would have a small and big MacBook Air, small and big MacBook Pro, and then if you want the cheapy, like as cheap as I can get a Mac, then you go for either the Mac Mini if you want a desktop, or the MacBook Pro base model if you want the updated, you know, M2 Mac that we also didn't get, but it's supposed to still be coming. So, you know, I think the line's not that confusing, especially for the laptops. And it's what they do with the iPad, it's what they do with the iPhone. So having two size options for their Macs, I think it makes sense.
I think so too, and we will be very curious to see if that actually ends up launching next year in 2023. And like you said, MacBook Air, we don't know when that's supposed to come, maybe towards the end of the year. We don't know what happened to the base MacBook Pro. We have no idea when the iPads are coming. It's like we know these things are coming, but now we have no idea when they're actually going to launch. So the rest of 2022 is exciting from Apple. We know for sure iPhone, Apple Watches, AirPods Pro, hopefully, though it's been a while since we've heard anything on that. That stuff is coming, but we've got no idea, no sense of time or any tangible idea of when it's actually going to launch. So it's kind of like anything can happen at this point.
Yep. I guess, you know, speaking of other rumors, according to Mark Gurman from that same report, he's saying that very exciting here, the base model might get a screen size bump from, I think it's 10.1 right now, to 10.2, which is not very much of a difference.
Well, wasn't it like the base iPad would get a redesign that I'm assuming would probably mirror the Air?
Right. Yeah.
I still think, though, Apple's got a bit of a predicament on their hands because the iPad Air is so good with the M1 that there's less of a compelling reason to go iPad Pro, especially if it doesn't get the M2 inside, and especially if there's no mini LED. Though we did hear, I saw some weird like Twitter rumors that Apple is working on some new stuff for, of course, WWDC and iPad OS. And yet again, there's a rumor this year that they are going to bring Final Cut Pro to the iPad Pro. And I'm assuming this would, well, I guess the iPad, I'm assuming this would just be with the iPad Pro, though with the M1 in both, why not in Air? So again, we hear this every single year, so I don't know how much you can actually trust this, but I am curious to see what iPad Pro upgrades come because, like we mentioned before, in very few instances, you're better off buying a Pro rather than just going with the Air because the Air is a couple $100 cheaper and you're getting basically the same thing, especially if you go with that smaller size for iPad Pro.
Yep. Yeah. The iPad line, I think right now is the most confusing only because like it's actually a good thing. It's that they're all really good. So it's just hard to choose which one to get. But as we say every time we talk about the iPad, hopefully this is the year when they really take the iPad software a little bit more seriously and make it pro like a lot of us are hoping for. But yeah, I agree. Though like it's still confusing because if they both have the M1, they've never limited software to one iPad over another. I don't think they have, at least. Like you can you're running iPad OS on the iPad mini even. So it's like, I don't see why they would suddenly limit one of these pro software. I mean, maybe they do though. Maybe that's what they do.
I think this is the year that I finally get burned with my older iPad because I think that if they bring this new sort of Mac desktop-esque app functionality to the iPad, it's only going to work on M1. So me and my busted A12Z are going to be, I think it's only going to be Apple Silicon, well, specifically M1 and forward.
That's interesting. I didn't think of it that way. Yeah. So your base iPad and your iPad mini and your older iPad Air or iPad Pro is still going to run what we have now, basically. But if you want the new and improved experience, you're going to need an M1. Yeah, that's interesting. I could see that happening.
Totally. Totally.
Yeah. I have one of those, so I'm okay with that. But that would be kind of frustrating for all those people who don't, and they then have to update their iPads. Like
you know what? I'm over it now because even if the iPad Pro gets Final Cut, I think I made up my mind I'd rather just have a laptop because I really just use the iPad Pro for content consumption. I use it for typing and stuff, and I don't need especially for me as an 11-inch iPad Pro owner, what advantage would I get to sell this and get a newer one? Especially the current one right now, there's really no difference. And then even if they brought a newer, updated model, okay, so it's got an Apple Silicon processor, the design's exactly the same, maybe like better battery life, but there's really no difference. So for me, it's like I'd love to run Final Cut Pro on my iPad, but if it's only an Apple Silicon thing, that is just not enough to get me to go iPad Pro latest gen. I'd rather just get a MacBook Air, and I'd have basically the same experience because that has M1 too. So what's really the thing that's going to give you a unique experience on the iPad Pro besides the fact that it's also a tablet?
Yeah, no, it's that's what I'm saying. Like this is the most confusing line that Apple makes right now because on one hand it's really good, but on the other, like it doesn't make sense to get it over like a MacBook Air, especially since they have the exact same chip inside. But I'm hopeful. I'm hoping that this is the year they talk about it, but I don't know. We say that every year, so who knows what's going to happen. But I think that's it. Anything else that we missed in terms of like news for this week? There was a good amount, but nothing crazy. Mainly the Studio Display and Mac Studio.
I don't think so. It's been a lot of controversy on the Studio Display. We talked about that. I'm curious, after you have a little bit more time with those products, sort of your thoughts next week on them. But I'm chilling here with my MacBook Pro. I've got my BenQ monitor. It'd be nice to have those upgrades, but I'm kind of like, let's see what happens. And I'm now more optimistic that we see maybe the iMac Pro, maybe we get that Studio Display Pro. I guess now it's just sort of playing the waiting game until WWDC, and hopefully those invites go out soon. I think last year they went out mid to late March, so maybe we see those soon. But as of now, we're just kind of waiting for the next event, the next big rumor to drop. And I think that's it for this week. Matt, anything else before we sort of wrap things up?
No, I was just looking to make sure we didn't have any questions, but no questions this week. So, I mean, that being said, we would love to answer your questions, especially, get your opinions on the Studio Display in the Mac Studio. Like this controversy. I'm sure if you're listening to this podcast or watching this podcast, you've seen all this controversy that we talked about. Mainly, the Mac Studio is like, fine, that's not there's no real controversy there, but The studio display, I'd love to know from all of you, is this overblown? Do you think the studio display is worth it? Do you think it's a product that you would buy if you were in the market for it? Or is it too expensive and you just buy something from, say, LG, like this Ultrafine, or something else from a different manufacturer, even if it might not be 5K? We'd love to hear from you. The hotline for that is 949-354-3508. Hey, I did that one from memory this time. Finally, it's only been like, a year and a half. But that is the number. You can give us a text, you can give us a call, and we will answer your question on the next one. But also, you don't have to limit it to that. You can also leave a comment on the YouTube channel, which you should definitely be subscribing to and checking out the video version. But yeah, I think that's it.
That's it, guys. Thank you guys so much for watching, listening. Also, drop us a rating and a review in the Apple Podcast app. That would greatly help out the podcast as well. Thank you so much, guys, for your support, and we'll see you guys right back here, same time, same place, next week on another episode of the Apple Circle Podcast.